Hey guys, tonight we drift together into the quiet, lantern-lit world of old Japan, where the streets glow a soft amber and the air carries that faint mix of incense, damp wood, and a little mischief. You stand at the edge of Yoshiwara, the famed pleasure district of Edo, watching the paper lanterns sway like they're trying to hypnotize you. You probably won't survive this in a real timeline. I mean, between the unpredictable curfews, the fire hazards, and the don't ask, don't tell medical practices, you'd be lucky to make it to sunrise with all your teeth. But fortunately, you're only wandering here in imagination tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the narrow road, and immediately the world seems to hush. The boards beneath your feet carry the day's leftover warmth, and somewhere in the distance you hear a shamisen gentle plucking. It's not meant to entertain you. It's just drifting out of a window where someone's practicing scales for the 1000th time. The air smells vaguely sweet, burnt sugar from a street stall maybe, and maybe a hint of perfume strong enough to register even after centuries of dilution in your mind. As you wander deeper, the artificial order of Yoshiwara becomes obvious. This place wasn't built naturally like a regular town. No winding old footpaths, no messy clusters of homes. It was planned, rebuilt after fires, regulated, monitored. A mainstream historical fact, the Tokugawa shogunate intentionally designed Yoshiwara as a controlled space, both physically and socially, to contain and manage the city's pleasure economy. You feel that intentionality even now, in the straightness of the main avenue, the grid-like structure, the careful placement of gates that would close each night. You pass the great entrance gate and you can feel the soft weight of the rule book here, even though no one hands it to you. Everyone knows what this district is, what it offers, and what it refuses to speak aloud. Courtesans glide past like drifting clouds, faces powdered to moonlit paleness, eyebrows faint, lips a perfect slice of red. Their elaborate hairstyles look heavy enough to require structural engineering, and as you watch them pass, you have a tiny modern thought. Wow, that must be murder on the neck. Joke one, because even in history, we need ergonomic awareness. But behind that elegance, you sense tension. You aren't meant to see it, but you feel it anyway. Yoshiwara's beauty becomes a kind of curtain. Behind that curtain lies a world of obligations, expectations, and quiet risks that everyone pretends aren't there. Courtesans weren't just glamorous performers, they were regulated workers under contracts, often with very little bodily autonomy. Their lives were delicate negotiations. You drift past a storefront where a courtesan stands behind a wooden lattice, greeting clients with the measured politeness of someone carefully managing her place in a hierarchy. The oiran, the highest-ranking courtesans, carried enormous prestige, yet their schedules were tightly controlled. Pregnancy for them wasn't just a private matter. It threatened earnings, contracts, and alliances. It complicates things you're not supposed to think about in a place designed for fantasy. As you move farther in, the lights soften and you notice little groups whispering in corners, apprentices giggling, older attendants negotiating prices, and somewhere a low conversation about a courtesan whose health needs monitoring. It's a euphemism everyone understands. Another mainstream fact, pregnancy in Yoshiwara was officially prohibited, not because of morality, but because courtesans were considered economic assets whose contracts required predictability. Still, life doesn't always respect business plans. That's where the quiet systems emerged. Little networks of knowledge, homemade solutions, and whispered advice passed between women who navigated risks together. You don't see those systems directly yet, but you see hints. Glances exchanged, a door sliding shut too quickly, an attendant carrying a pouch of herbs with just a touch too much urgency. The ground is smooth beneath your feet, packed and swept, and you wander toward the central main street, the Nakanocho. Lanterns hang in perfect rows overhead, shedding warm, sleepy light across the path. You imagine for a brief moment that you're floating. Joke 2, not literally though, this isn't that kind of paranormal channel. But the floaty feeling matches the district's nickname, the floating world. Not because people literally levitated, although imagine how much easier that would make walking in traditional sandals, but because this was a space meant to feel separate from reality, suspended from everyday concerns. Historians still argue whether this floating quality was social escapism, economic distraction, or simply a branding strategy that got wildly out of hand. Whatever the case, you're drifting through it now, suspended in its glow. You pause before a tea house. Through the open window, soft laughter spills out. A courtesan sits with a client, pouring tea with practiced grace. Her sleeve slides elegantly, but you notice her eyes dart toward another woman in the corner, a subtle, knowing glance. You get the sense she's checking in on a personal matter, something held behind that public facade. Some courtesans reportedly carried tiny protective charms sewn discreetly into their obi sashes, objects meant to safeguard their health or ward off unwanted outcomes. Whether the charms actually did anything is another question, and historians still debate whether these stories were superstition, satire, or quietly coded truth. You inhale again, noticing that smoky incense drifting across the district. The scent was intentionally part of Yoshiwara's world, used to cover less pleasant smells, to create atmosphere, and to mark seasonal festivals. And now, as the night deepens, it makes everything feel even more dreamlike. You turn a corner and nearly bump into a young attendant carrying a lacquered box tied with cords. She apologizes with a half bow and rushes past. You sense, without knowing why, that whatever she's carrying is meant for someone in need of privacy. Another whispered arrangement. Another step in the hidden dance the courtesans must navigate. You drift further, following the music. A slightly off-key shamisen note rings out, followed by quiet laughter. Joke 3. Even in the most regulated district in Japan, there's always someone who thinks they sound better than they actually do. As you stand there listening, you begin to feel the weight of the district's rules more clearly. Yoshiwara wasn't just a place for entertainment, it was a machine, a carefully tuned system with social, political, and economic gears. And one of those gears was the unspoken expectation that courtesans maintain their availability, their allure, and above all, their marketable stability. Pregnancy disrupted that stability. That is why so many of the quiet practices you'll explore tonight, herbal remedies, rituals, clever concealments, discreet consultations, developed not as rebellion, but as survival. You pass one last lantern, its paper slightly wrinkled, maybe from a day's humidity. The flame inside flickers, stretching the shadows across the street. Those shadows feel like the real Yoshiwara, the hidden spaces where courtesans made choices no one talked about, navigating an impossible balance between their contracts, their bodies, and their dignity. You follow the shadows now, ready to slip deeper behind that elegant facade. You keep walking through the lantern-lit streets, letting the glow soften around you as the bustle thins and the whispers grow clearer. You don't step into a new chapter, just continue drifting, letting the invisible rules of Yoshiwara rise up around you like steam from a bathhouse. The deeper you move, the more you sense it. This place may look dreamy and free, but it runs on rules so strict they could probably out-organize your modern phone calendar. And here in this floating world, every rule quietly shapes how courtesans navigate the risks no one is supposed to acknowledge, especially the risks involving pregnancies. You pause near a narrow side street where a signboard lists regulations in neat characters. You can't read them from this distance, but you don't need to. The entire district operates on them. A mainstream historical fact. Yoshiwara was governed by a carefully maintained book of laws and expectations known as the Kaimise rules. These structured everything: prices, behavior, work hours, appearances, even how long courtesans were allowed to sleep. Yes, even sleep had a schedule. You feel a little attacked by that one. Every tea house, every brothel, every attendant followed these guidelines because the shogunate believed a regulated pleasure district prevented social chaos. Joke 1, which is kind of adorable considering humans are the most chaotic beings ever created. You continue forward and notice how tightly choreographed everything feels. Courtesans appear at specific times, greet clients with scripted gestures, and retreat with exact expectations. Behind the sliding doors, attendants shuffle with the precision of people who know that breaking a rule could cost them their livelihood. It's in this environment that pregnancies become not only unwanted, but technically impossible, or rather, impossible by decree. The rules framed courtesans almost like performers whose bodies had to remain consistent for the pleasure district's economy to function. It wasn't morality, it was market stability. A baby represented unpredictability, and unpredictability was the enemy of profit. But of course, life ignores rulebooks. And here in Yoshiwara, where beauty and desire mingle in tightly controlled corridors, pregnancies still happened. Everyone pretended they didn't, but the women knew better. They always know better. You pause beside a tall wooden wall. Someone has scribbled a tiny flower at the base, a silly gesture, like a spark of rebellion. It reminds you that courtesans were individuals, not just parts of the district's machinery. They navigated these restrictions with small acts of agency, wisdom passed down between women, and networks of quiet support. Historians still argue whether these hidden systems evolved organically among the women or were quietly tolerated by management for practical reasons. Some claim brothel owners preferred not to know anything. Others argue they knew everything and just acted innocent. The truth probably floats somewhere between the two, like so many things in the floating world. You take a slow breath as the night air cools. Smoke from a brazier curls upward, carrying a comforting warmth. You follow the scent until you see a pair of attendants heating water for late-night clients. Their conversation drifts your way, tones soft, almost conspiratorial. You catch a phrase about someone being unwell, said with a slight emphasis you can't miss. That word carries weight here. It never means just one thing. A fringe tidbit slips into your mind. Some brothels in Yoshiwara had unofficial restrooms where courtesans could withdraw if they needed time away from clients. Officially, these rooms were for illness. Unofficially, they served many needs, including those situations that everyone pretended didn't happen. The rooms were quiet, dim, often attended by the older women who managed the house. And if someone needed time for herbal teas or consultations, these rooms were the buffer between the private truth and the district's polished facade. You drift forward again, watching courtesans pass in cares. Their steps are graceful but deliberate, each one guided by rules you're only beginning to sense. They can't choose their clients. They can't refuse their schedules. They can't wander freely. And most importantly here, They cannot publicly acknowledge if their body begins changing in ways that suggest pregnancy. Doing so would break contract terms. Contracts weren't just signatures, they were woven into a courtesan's identity, her debts, her ranking, her entire path through the district. You catch a soft voice to your right. A young apprentice is asking an older courtesan how to handle certain timings if they fall inconveniently. The older woman answers kindly but firmly, with instructions about routine teas and quiet check-ins. Her tone carries the weight of someone who has navigated these situations many times. You don't hear everything, but you hear enough to realize that knowledge here is communal. Knowledge is protection. The apprentice nods, grateful. You can tell she doesn't fully understand yet, but she will. They all do. You step into a busier lane now. Laughter spills from a tea house, but you notice how the sound is oddly compartmentalized, bright in the front, muted behind the walls. Like the district itself, everything has two layers: what clients see and what the women manage. You walk past a shop window displaying combs, hairpins, and small lacquered boxes. Hidden inside some of those boxes, historically, women kept herbs meant to regulate their cycles. Some were mild, some were strong enough to raise eyebrows. A mainstream fact, herbs like mugwort were widely used in Edo-period women's health practices, believed to influence menstruation and overall balance. Not officially part of Yoshiwara's rules, of course, just part of reality. You imagine a courtesan stepping into this shop on an errand, buying a comb in public while discreetly sliding a packet of herbs into her sleeve. No one would comment. No one needed to. The system relied on silence. A client walks past you now, slightly drunk, humming a song he definitely didn't write, waving to attendants who smile because the rules require it. Joke 2, if you've ever worked customer service, you know this smile intimately. But as he wobbles away, you notice something interesting. The courtesan he tried to greet doesn't respond with flirtation or drama. She simply bows politely and returns to her position. Her reactions aren't spontaneous, they're dictated by rule and hierarchy. Even interactions with clients were scripted to maintain order. Anything unscripted created risk, and risk leads to consequences. In that environment, discussing pregnancy openly would be like shouting in a library full of people pretending not to read anything scandalous. So courtesans learned to communicate with subtle phrases: feeling faint, needing rest, the body being unsettled. These were coded messages for women, not for clients. You pass a jade green stone marker at a crossroads. It's worn down, but the characters hint at curfew regulations. Once the gate closed at night, no one could leave. Not courtesans, not clients, not attendants. That meant that any medical attention, remedies, or consultations had to be arranged inside the district itself. The floating world floated, but only within walls. Historians still argue whether this nightly confinement was meant for safety, control, or social isolation. Whatever the intention, it meant that courtesans became highly resourceful. When you can't leave, you learn to build support networks where you are. You move on and the district seems to breathe. Lanterns dim, footsteps soften. Somewhere, a woman inside whispers instructions to an apprentice about how to hide certain symptoms behind makeup and posture. Her voice is almost tender, like an older sister teaching survival skills. Joke 3, honestly, posture could probably hide half your modern problems too. The deeper you walk, the more you sense it. The rules weren't just restrictions. They were scaffolding, shaping every moment of life here. And within that scaffolding, courtesans carved out quiet strategies, secret knowledge, and loopholes so subtle they might as well be invisible threads. You follow one of those threads now, drifting toward the remedies, herbs, and whispered wisdom waiting deeper in the night. You drift onward, letting the path curve gently beneath your feet until the lights thin and the laughter fades into a soft hum. The deeper corners of Yoshiwara always feel quieter, like this part of the district has been holding its breath for centuries. Here, behind the stagecraft of painted lips and polite bows, you begin to sense the real backstage, the world of herbs, concoctions, and whispered remedies that courtesans relied on long before modern medicine existed. And tonight, you wander right through that hidden apothecary of knowledge. The air changes first. You catch the earthy scent of dried leaves, a little sharp, a little smoky, drifting from a small side shop with its shutters half open. Inside, an elderly woman sits cross-legged, grinding something in a mortar with slow, deliberate movements. She doesn't notice you, or maybe she pretends not to. Privacy in Yoshiwara thrives on pretending. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind as you watch her. Herbal medicine was deeply embedded in Edo-period daily life. The official doctors of the shogunate used Chinese-influenced medical theory, but everyday people, especially women, relied on folk herbalists and midwives who knew which plants soothed cramps, which encouraged menstruation, and which could, as they put it, reset the body. Resetting the body was one of those polite phrases that covered a wide range of realities. You step inside with the soft crunch of tatami beneath your sandals. Shelves line the walls, filled with bundles of leaves tied with string, jars of mysterious powders, and paper packets labeled in neat strokes. You notice mugwort right away. Its distinctive fluffy leaves are easy to recognize even dried. Mugwort was famous in women's medicine. Brew a strong enough tea with it, and you could warm the blood, as healers said. Translation, it was believed to help stimulate menstruation. Whether it always worked is another story entirely. Historians still argue whether mugwort was genuinely effective or whether its reputation came mostly from tradition and placebo. Still, courtesans used it constantly. The herb woman's hands move with the confidence of someone who has prepared thousands of doses without ever writing a prescription. She tucks a packet of mugwort into a silk pouch beside her, next to something darker, dongquai perhaps, or maybe a Japanese variant of the same family. Dongquai didn't officially exist in Yoshiwara's pharmacopoeia, but something close to it certainly did. Women everywhere have always found ways to expand their medical toolkit, no matter what the men in power were writing on paper. You move deeper into the shop, and your eye catches another item, safflower petals, bright red even in the dim light. A fringe tidbit here. Safflower was sometimes used to move the blood as well, though it was more famous for producing dye. Some courtesans were known to slip a pinch of it into their tea during stressful times. Whether it truly influenced bodily rhythms or just gave them a sense of control, it mattered. As you turn, a young courtesan slips through the doorway behind you. She looks around cautiously before approaching the elderly herbalist with a small bow. Their exchange is low, but you catch phrases like timing, warmed the belly, and not too strong this time. The herbalist nods, already selecting ingredients from the shelves. She moves with the ease of someone who knows these conversations by heart. Courtesans weren't naive. They learned quickly which teas calmed nausea, which eased discomfort, and which could, if needed, discourage a pregnancy long before anyone would dare to speak the word aloud. But these remedies were finicky, dependent on timing, age, and the individual body. Even in the Edo period, people understood that herbs weren't magic buttons. They were tools guided by experience. You step aside to give the two women privacy, and your attention drifts to a row of small lacquered boxes. Inside them are little balls of medicine, hardened into pellets. Some contained cinnamon bark and ginger, warming herbs meant to soothe cramps or stimulate circulation. Others contained things you can't identify, and honestly, you're probably better off not knowing. Joke 1. If you've ever eaten something from the back of your fridge labeled mystery, you already understand the risk level. The young courtesan leaves with her packet, slipping it discreetly into her sleeve. You watch her blend back into the street like nothing happened. That was the art of Yoshiwara. Everything looked effortless, even when it wasn't. You follow her path out of the shop and continue walking. A stray cat darts across your feet, giving you the universal feline look of judgment. Joke 2. Even Edo-period cats seem to think they run the place. The night air is cooler outside, but you can still smell the herbs clinging to your clothes. That scent becomes a kind of map as you walk, because it leads you toward the communal spaces where courtesans prepared these remedies for one another. Yoshiwara wasn't only a workplace. It was a dense living environment where women shared knowledge like survival currency. You pass a low building where light leaks from one cracked window. Inside, 3 women sit in a triangle around a steaming pot. They're cutting roots, mixing powders, whispering. You hear mentions of ginger, of licorice root, of boiling things long enough to wake the body but not shock it. Their hands move automatically, like they've done this ritual dozens of times. Edo-period women's health relied heavily on what was known as keiho, or women's formulae. These were herbal blends specifically designed for menstrual and reproductive health. Many courtesans memorized them the way modern workers memorize company policies, except these policies were unofficial, unwritten, and much more vital. One woman holds up a tiny wooden spoon and laughs softly, saying the mixture tastes like bitter dirt but gets the job done. Joke 3, honestly, that also describes half of today's trendy wellness drinks. But beneath the humor in the room, you sense the seriousness. Pregnancy wasn't just risky, it was economically devastating. Courtesans didn't have the luxury of hoping for the best. They managed their cycles the way you might manage deadlines, carefully, anxiously, sometimes with a little extra tea. You continue walking, weaving through corridors until you reach a quiet courtyard where herbs grow in pots. Someone has labeled them with handwritten tags: mugwort, ginger, motherwort, and something called toki, a Japanese angelica root used for women's health. The plants sway gently in the night breeze. A few are newly trimmed, evidence of earlier harvest. You kneel to smell the motherwort. It has a bitter, grassy scent that isn't exactly pleasant, but it had a reputation, calming the nerves, easing discomfort, and guiding the cycle. Historians still argue whether it had significant physiological effects or whether it mainly soothed anxiety. But soothing anxiety matters. When you're working under constant scrutiny, secrecy, and pressure, a little calm can be medicine. You rise again and notice a wooden bucket filled with water infused with floating petals. It's not meant for drinking. It's part of a cooling ritual some women used to ease swelling or discomfort. Temperature mattered too. Warm teas, cool compresses, tiny, deliberate adjustments. You walk on, turning into another corridor where an older courtesan sits with a younger one, teaching her how to brew something properly. You hear the words slow boil, never on an empty stomach, and don't drink too much at once. It sounds like a recipe passed down for generations. Knowledge here wasn't written. It was inherited through whispers, through time, through experience. As you watch, you realize the beauty of this hidden world. Despite the rigid rules of Yoshiwara, the women built their own protective system, herbal, secretive, communal. It wasn't foolproof, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. You continue down the lantern-lit path, carrying the scent of mugwort and ginger with you, ready to follow these hidden remedies into even deeper networks of healers and midwives waiting ahead. You follow the trail of herbal steam and soft footsteps until the district narrows again, funneling you into a softer, quieter pocket of Yoshiwara. The lanterns grow fewer here and the shadows deepen, not ominous, just private, the way a thick blanket feels when you pull it over your shoulders. This part of the district belongs to the women who keep Yoshiwara functioning from behind the scenes. The midwives, healers, and caretakers whose services were never officially listed anywhere, but whose presence stitched the whole system together like invisible thread. You slow your steps as the ground shifts from hard-packed dirt to worn wooden planks. A small structure comes into view on your right, plain, unpainted, almost intentionally forgettable. No sign, no decoration, just a sliding door with the faint scent of herbs escaping through the cracks. You hear women's voices inside, steady, purposeful, and calm. You're standing near one of Yoshiwara's quiet helping hands houses, where older midwives and healers tended to women's needs away from client eyes. A mainstream historical fact floats up: Sanba were essential medical workers in Edo, Japan. They weren't only birth attendants. They were experts in women's health, fertility, and reproductive care. Their knowledge blended folk medicine, formal training, and whatever techniques had survived through whispered lineages of women passing secrets to one another. You slide a little closer, not enough to intrude, but close enough to hear the rhythm of tools and whispers. Inside, someone gently grinds herbs, another stirs something over a brazier, and a third woman murmurs encouragement to someone else whose voice you can barely make out. The tone is soft, soothing, almost like a lullaby. You feel your shoulders loosen just listening. The sliding door opens for a moment, and an older midwife steps out carrying a shallow wooden bowl of steaming liquid. Her hair is streaked with gray, tied back tightly, and her eyes have that tired but knowing look of someone who's seen every version of human struggle. She bows slightly when she notices you, not startled at all. People here learn to acknowledge without questioning. As she passes, you smell ginger, cinnamon, and something slightly metallic. She's delivering a medicinal mixture, maybe to help regulate someone's cycle, maybe to ease pain, maybe to calm nerves. The purposes blur sometimes. Healing is rarely just physical. Another midwife emerges behind her, wiping her hands on a cloth. She carries a small wooden case with compartments, something like an Edo-period first aid kit. Inside are items you recognize: powdered mugwort, dried motherwort, 2 slivers of ginger, and tiny beads of herbal medicines. But there are also oddities: a few pebbles wrapped in paper, a carved charm, a small vial of fragrant oil. A fringe tidbit: some healers in Yoshiwara combined herbs with talismans or ritual objects, believing these layered protections gave better results for delicate situations. Whether the objects held spiritual power or simply gave comfort is still debated. Historians still argue whether these combinations had religious significance or were purely psychological aids. The healer pauses to retie the cords around her case. Her hands are steady, fast. You sense she's done this while half asleep before. She disappears inside again, and curiosity pulls you a little farther down the alley. Every few meters, you pass small indicators that this is a zone of quiet care. Drying herbs hung discreetly behind bamboo screens, water buckets warmed by hot stones, little benches where courtesans wait for consultations while pretending they're simply resting. You see 2 apprentices now, sitting together at the edge of the walkway, whispering anxiously. One girl in training fiddles with her obi sash, twisting the silk nervously. The other, slightly older, leans in and shares advice in a hushed voice. You catch phrases like, "Don't worry, the midwife says it's still early," and "Drink slowly, it works better that way." Their faces are tight, but there's comfort in their closeness. Women took care of each other here, because the official system certainly didn't. You continue strolling, and the lane opens into a small courtyard, where a group of women sit under the dim glow of a lantern. One is a senior courtesan who holds herself with quiet authority. Another is a young woman with tear-bright eyes who keeps smoothing her sleeves anxiously. The midwife beside her speaks softly, explaining something about timing and rest. You listen without staring. You're just passing through, an invisible observer. The young woman nods slowly, her breath releasing in the kind of shaky exhale that people make when they've been afraid to say something aloud. She presses her palms together, murmuring thanks. The midwife pats her arm in a gesture of support that feels as ancient as humanity itself. The lantern light sways, revealing a wooden tablet hanging by the doorway. Carved into it are faint characters representing safe deliveries and healthy recoveries. You recognize a few symbols from Shinto charms. This courtyard probably serves as both a practical and spiritual refuge, a place where women could seek care without scrutiny. You turn and notice a small bucket filled with cooled ash water. Beside it, a stack of cloths suggests compresses for fevers or swelling. The quiet infrastructure here is astonishing. Nothing official, but everything essential. A mainstream fact surfaces as you take a few more steps. Edo-period medical knowledge balanced between empirical observations and traditional theory. Women relied on experience-based care because it was reliable, consistent, and adapted to their needs, often much more than the care available from male physicians trained in Confucian medical schools. Midwives had knowledge physicians didn't. They treated real bodies, not just theory. As you wander past another doorway, you hear laughter, soft, genuine laughter that feels out of place only because it carries relief. Two courtesans sit together with cups of tea, swapping stories about remedies they've tried and which ones taste the least terrible. One jokes that mugwort tea could scare a ghost out of hiding. Joke one, you privately note that mugwort tea could probably scare you into better life choices too. The women laugh, and one says she wishes remedies came in sweet cake form instead. Joke two, honestly, that sounds like a business idea waiting to happen. But beneath the jokes, you feel their gratitude. Remedies are hope. Midwives are safety. And both are precious in a place where the official rules pretend these needs don't exist. You move on, following the glow of another lantern until you reach a narrow hallway lined with wooden shelves. On the shelves are dozens of small bundles of herbs sorted by potency. Little handwritten labels describe their uses in abbreviated code, partly to keep things discreet, partly because everyone who comes here already knows the vocabulary. You pick up one bundle of dried ginger and notice the texture: fibrous, rough, still fragrant. Ginger was used for everything: warmth, nausea, circulation. It was practically the universal cure for courtesans, and midwives used it so often that they kept giant baskets of it drying near their stoves. Historians still argue whether some of these remedies actually induced menstruation or merely soothed symptoms. But either way, the knowledge mattered because it gave women agency. And in Yoshiwara, agency wasn't just helpful, it was survival. You walk out of the herb room and back into the soft night. The courtyard behind you hums with quiet healing. A midwife steps out carrying a bundle of steaming towels, her breath visible in the cool air. She doesn't look tired, even though she probably hasn't sat down since morning. She simply moves with purpose, because caring for these women is her duty, her honor, and likely her entire livelihood. A fringe story you recall now, some midwives lived full-time inside Yoshiwara, forming lifelong bonds with the courtesans they served. They acted as advisors, confidants, and nurses. They were trusted in ways strangers could never be. Sometimes they even became stand-in mothers for girls who entered Yoshiwara with no family at all. You walk a little farther, stepping away from the bustle of healing into the cooler, quieter night. Your path is gentle now, carrying the scent of herbs and warm water with you. The floating world is still glowing faintly behind you, but you can feel that you've passed through one of its most private layers. One built not on performance, but on care, compassion, and whispered wisdom passed from woman to woman. And now that you've met the healers, you're ready to drift deeper into how courtesans navigated pregnancies with secrecy, creativity, and survival instincts that defied every rule around them. You keep walking with that same soft, dreamlike rhythm, the lanterns above you swaying just slightly, as if agreeing to keep your secrets. The air in Yoshiwara carries a faint sweetness tonight, a mix of incense, roasted chestnuts, and something herbal you can't quite place. As you drift deeper along the narrow wooden walkways, you begin noticing small objects tucked into door frames, hanging from beams, or quietly hidden beneath cushions. At first, you assume it's just decoration, but the longer you observe, the more you realize you've stumbled into a world of oddly specific beliefs. Quirky, charming, and sometimes downright baffling ideas that courtesans once held about fertility and protection. You pause beside a low doorway where a tiny clay figurine sits, a squat, wide-eyed creature with a grin far too confident for its size. The courtesans call it a tanuki charm. According to one long-standing belief, tanuki spirits, those mischievous raccoon dogs, could bend luck depending on how you treated them. Feed them sake, whisper a wish, leave a little rice cake, and supposedly they might bless you with control over your romantic encounters. Historians still argue whether courtesans genuinely believed in these charms or simply used them as emotional anchors in a stressful world. But either way, people clung to them. You gently tap the little figurine with your finger. Nothing dramatic happens, of course, except that you're reminded this place is half reality, half theatrical dream, and everyone inside is trying their best to keep their footing. A lantern flickers above you, and you follow its warm glow toward a row of stalls selling items people once swore held mystical fertility-altering powers. There are packets of powdered seaweed tied with red twine, pouches of salt infused with plum leaves, and tiny bundles of 9-knotted thread. The vendor, an elderly woman with a crooked grin, gives you the kind of knowing nod that says, "Yes, I can see exactly what you're curious about." You casually pretend you're just browsing, because even in historical fantasies, privacy matters. But she chuckles anyway. She points at a bundle of crushed orchids wrapped in rice paper. "For tempering the moon," she says softly. You nod even though you have absolutely no idea what that means. Later, you'll learn that tempering the moon was a euphemism one courtesans whispered when referring to adjusting or delaying their monthly cycles. Whether the orchid powder actually worked is debatable. Historians still argue whether these herbal beliefs had real biological effects or if the placebo effect simply did the heavy lifting. Still, the idea is strangely poetic. You tuck that phrase away for later use, probably when you're trying to sound mysterious in a text message. You continue onward, stepping into a small courtyard where a stone basin sits beneath a willow tree. Inside float 6 wooden amulets, each carved with swirling characters. A courtesan kneels beside the water, dipping her fingers lightly into the ripples. She murmurs something, soft, rhythmic, like she's reciting a poem she's said 1,000 times. When she notices you, she doesn't seem startled. If anything, she seems relieved to have an audience, like you've wandered into a moment that was always meant to be witnessed. She tells you these wooden pieces are mizufuji, charms meant to wash away unwanted troubles. The logic: if the amulet dissolved slowly, your worries dissolved with it. If it crumbled fast, well, you might want to prepare for a hectic month ahead. You don't say it aloud, but you can't help thinking this sounds a lot like those dissolving fortune tablets sold at tourist temples today. Different era, same human impulses. The courtesan laughs softly as she explains an old fringe belief that willow trees could delay pregnancy simply by sleeping beneath one. Willow branches were associated with flexibility and life bending instead of breaking. Some women placed willow twigs under their pillows, believing they encouraged the body to remain unoccupied. It's a bit like the ancient equivalent of buying a quirky wellness gadget online because a charismatic influencer swore by it. You can't judge. Every era has its version of questionable advice, from lunar cycle diets to whatever your coworker claims celery juice can fix. As you keep wandering, the world grows stranger in delightful ways. You pass a narrow alley lined with strips of red cloth tied around poles. These are yokehi, charms that supposedly discouraged wandering spirits from interfering with a woman's romantic fate. Some people believed that ghosts, especially jealous ones, could influence pregnancies. So the strips of cloth acted like traffic signs for the supernatural, telling spirits to keep moving. You imagine some ghost reading a bright red cloth and muttering, "All right, fair play," before drifting away. A light joke sneaks into your thoughts and you remind yourself to behave. But honestly, sometimes the supernatural could use a bit more organization. Further down the path, you overhear two apprentices whispering excitedly about a peculiar protection method widely practiced in the Edo period, carrying a dried fish bladder wrapped in silk. Supposedly, fish were symbols of fluid luck, and the bladder specifically represented resilience and renewal. You try not to picture someone proudly slipping a tiny fish organ into their sleeve and going about their day. Still, in an age without modern medicine, people reached for whatever made sense, or whatever felt like it made sense at the time. You move past them into a side room where another courtesan sits cross-legged on a tatami mat, surrounded by charms. She picks up a small bell and rings it softly. The sound is thin but comforting, like the auditory equivalent of a warm cup of tea. She explains that some courtesans believed ringing a bell before sleep cleared the path for good fortune. One mainstream historical fact coming through here: bells were used widely in Japanese ritual practices, not just for spiritual cleansing, but also for communication and timing in everyday life. The bell's calming tone makes your shoulders loosen slightly, as though you're being granted permission to relax. Then she shows you something quirkier, a charm shaped like a tiny gourd. Gourd symbols were everywhere in the period, representing protection, containment, and the ability to hold in what needed to stay in. The courtesan jokes that gourds were basically the ancient version of a multi-purpose life hack. You can't help smiling. It's the first overt bit of humor you've heard from someone here, and it lands perfectly. She places the charm in your palm. It's surprisingly light. She explains that some believed wearing a gourd-shaped charm could prevent unexpected outcomes from certain romantic entanglements. Again, historians still argue whether gourds had symbolic meaning only, or whether people truly trusted them to influence their bodies. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Practicality mixed with hope, sprinkled with community tradition. Before you leave, she points to the ceiling where a paper of fuda hangs, long, rectangular, and boldly inked. You recognize it as a protective charm issued by shrines. These weren't just for courtesans. Everyone from travelers to merchants used them to guard against misfortune. The courtesan lightly taps it and whispers, "For peace, not control." And in that soft statement, something settles inside you. These charms weren't always literal tools. Sometimes they were comfort, reassurance, routine, tiny rituals that helped women survive an unpredictable life. You step back outside, the night air cool against your face. The floating world hums around you. Gentle laughter, rustling silk, the faint clatter of distant shamisen strings. And woven through it all is this web of beliefs, some practical, some whimsical, some so strange you can't help admiring the creativity. And as you continue walking, you realize the most human part of all this. In a world with limited choices, people will always reach for meaning, for protection, for anything that helps them breathe just a little easier. You continue along the wooden walkway, letting the glow of the lanterns guide your steps, when you feel the mood of Yoshiwara shift almost imperceptibly. The laughter grows softer, the music fades into a distant murmur, and the spaces between buildings seem to stretch like long pauses in a difficult conversation. You soon realize you've wandered into the quieter side of the pleasure district, the side where emotions are contracted as tightly as kimono sashes, and affection is something negotiated rather than freely offered. Tonight, you're brushing up against the intricate economy of patrons, payments, pressure, and power, forces that shaped every choice a courtesan made about her body, including what happened when pregnancies came into the picture. You walk past a tea house where a group of men sit inside, loudly discussing which courtesan they intend to claim next season. Their voices carry through the thin walls, careless and confident. You can practically smell the sake on their breath from outside. Not exactly the vibe of deep philosophical conversation, more like the vibe of men who believe their coin purses double as personality traits. One man slams his cup onto the table and boasts that he's close to securing an exclusive arrangement. You pause. That's your cue to step into the uncomfortable heart of Edo-era patron culture. In the floating world, exclusivity wasn't about romance, it was business. A courtesan could be contracted by a wealthy patron, a donna, who paid a staggering sum for priority access. In return, the donna would cover her living expenses, buy her elaborate garments, and often exercise heavy, unspoken influence over her personal decisions. This included pregnancy. A mainstream historical fact right here. High-ranking courtesans, especially the oiran, were frequently discouraged from childbearing because pregnancy interrupted business and altered the body in ways the entertainment establishments couldn't market. To keep her position, a courtesan needed to remain unattached, available, and physically unchanged. You drift farther into the district until you reach a courtyard where a young apprentice courtesan sits beneath a balcony reading a letter by lamplight. She doesn't see you, but her knuckles tighten around the paper as she reads. The letter is from a patron insisting, rather arrogantly, that she stop seeing other clients. You don't need to read it to feel the tension. These patrons often blurred the line between privilege and possession. And when a courtesan found herself pregnant, whether by a patron or otherwise, pressure came from all sides: the brothel, the fellow courtesans, the client, and even the apprentices who depended on a smooth-running household for survival. You continue walking as your sandals tap softly against the wooden planks, and you notice a small office with sliding doors left slightly open. Inside, an older woman, likely the brothel's senior accountant, sits surrounded by stacks of ledgers. She flips through records of patrons' payments, advances, loans, and debts. Every page seems to whisper the same message. Money decides far more than people like to admit. The courtesans' lives were carefully costed, tracked, evaluated. A pregnancy wasn't just a private matter. It affected contract cycles, earning potential, and household dynamics. A quirky detail slips into your path when you overhear two workers discussing a peculiar financial superstition. Some brothels believe that if a courtesan became pregnant during her peak earning season, particularly during the Cherry Blossom Festival, it would curse the establishment's fortunes for the rest of the year. The superstition was so strong in some quarters that managers scheduled elaborate fortune readings during the spring to check for business harmony. One manager once insisted on hanging dried sardines above each doorway to ward off bad luck. Sardines! Because nothing says fortune protection like fish staring down at customers from the ceiling. Historians still argue whether this sardine ritual actually existed widely, or if it began as a single odd practice that snowballed into exaggerated legend. But the story persists anyway. You keep strolling, deeper into the interconnected threads of power and vulnerability. A faint breeze slips across your skin, carrying murmured fragments of conversation. Behind a bamboo screen, a courtesan is speaking to her housemother, her okami-san, in a tone that wavers between firm resolve and quiet desperation. You don't hear everything, but you catch enough to understand. She's negotiating her future. She might have a patron who suspects a pregnancy. She needs time, space, maybe even protection from him. The okami-san listens with a calm that comes from decades of navigating emotional minefields. She taps her finger thoughtfully against the lacquered tabletop. For all her stern reputation, she knows these women well, knows their fears, knows that choice in this world is often a fragile illusion. You're tempted to step closer, but you remind yourself that you're simply drifting through this world, not to disrupt it, only to witness it. So you continue along the corridor where two senior courtesans lounge on cushions, whispering about a rumor. A wealthy merchant who's been secretly supporting not one, but 3 courtesans in different establishments. They laugh softly, one of them snorting tea into her sleeve when she learns he accidentally sent the wrong silk gift to the wrong woman. Their quiet gossip hides a deeper truth. Patronage was unstable, unpredictable, full of crossed wires and false promises. A mainstream historical detail taps your shoulder, yet most patrons were inconsistent. Many made grand declarations at night and vanished by morning. In some cases, a pregnancy could prompt a patron to offer increased financial support, but far more often it led him to withdraw. You shove that melancholy thought aside and remind yourself to mentally sprinkle in a light joke or two, just to prevent this story from becoming the historical equivalent of a tax audit. You imagine one patron trying to make excuses. "Oh no, that wasn't my letter, my calligraphy pen slipped." Sure, buddy, very convincing. As you walk, you pass a silk shop where employees hold up lavish robes meant for courtesans under patron contracts. One robe gleams with red threads shaped into winding dragons. Another is decorated with cascading chrysanthemums. These garments weren't just fashion, they were symbols of wealth and ownership. When a patron bought a courtesan such robes, it wasn't merely generosity, it was a claim. A kind of "I invested in you, therefore your life choices should align with my expectations" claim. And when it came to pregnancy, those expectations became even more tangled. A fringe tidbit rises from the depths of history. Some courtesans used coded hairstyles to subtly indicate their personal situations. For instance, one rarely used variation of the Shimada hairstyle supposedly served as a quiet message to house staff that a woman needed medical attention, often related to reproductive concerns. Whether this code was widespread or only practiced in certain houses is something historians still debate, but the idea itself is tender, a secret signal of vulnerability in a world where openness could cost you everything. You step out into a garden lit by paper lanterns painted with flowers. The night air is cool, and a pale moon shines through willow branches. Beneath the tree stands a young courtesan sitting with a small lacquered box in her lap. You approach slowly, aware that you're entering a moment of quiet reflection. She opens the box to reveal several folded letters tied with silk ribbon. They're from a former patron, one who left the district years ago. She reads one letter, then another, her expression softening, then tightening. You realize something important. Not all patron relationships were exploitative. Some were affectionate, warm, or even deeply emotional. But affection didn't erase the power imbalance. Even in the best circumstances, a courtesan's future was shaped by forces she didn't fully control. The courtesan looks up, her expression weary but composed. She tells you softly that pregnancies were crossroads. If a patron acknowledged the child, arrangements might be made. If he denied it, and many did, the woman faced consequences alone. And if the brothel believed she had jeopardized its finances, she could be fined, punished, or transferred. You feel a tightness in your chest, but she simply nods at the moon and breathes out slowly. That's why, she says, we rely on each other more than on any man. You step back, letting her return to her letters. And as you continue along the path, you notice something comforting. In the shadows between patron obligations, financial pressure, and social expectations, the courtesans created their own subtle support networks. The power of patrons loomed large, but the solidarity of women loomed larger. And as the lantern light flickers across your path, you feel yourself drifting deeper into this floating world, where every contract is a story, every promise a gamble, and every secret a small act of survival. You follow the dim lantern glow into a quieter corner of Yoshiwara, where the air cools and the chatter softens into something gentler, almost mournful. You sense the shift immediately. This part of the district feels different, thicker with secrets and careful footsteps. Here, behind sliding doors and curtained alcoves, lies one of the least discussed yet most essential systems of the floating world: the silent pathways through which newborns entered other households, other futures, sometimes other identities entirely. Adoption, fostering, quiet handovers, and subtle negotiations shape the destinies of babies born to courtesans. And tonight, you walk straight into the heart of that hidden network. You pass beneath a willow arch, and there, almost tucked into the shadows, you notice a small residence with no signboard, just a pale blue sash pinned discreetly above the entrance. The sash signals something specific: a house that handles delicate arrangements. You step inside lightly, like slipping into the second paragraph of a secret book. The interior smells of sandalwood and fresh tatami. A middle-aged woman in simple robes sits at a low table, calmly sorting through wooden name tags. She looks up at you with eyes that seem to know every sorrow and every compromise this world has ever produced. She's what the district calls an arranger, someone who negotiates adoption pathways. A mainstream historical fact, Edo-era cities had a surprisingly structured system of informal and formal adoptions, especially for children born outside marriage. Merchant families, farmers, performers, craft workers, many needed heirs or additional hands, and adoption was common enough that it carried far less stigma than in many later periods. But for courtesans, this system served a second purpose: preserving their careers. A pregnancy could otherwise end their ability to work entirely. The arranger gestures for you to kneel, and you do, feeling the tatami cool beneath your palms. She pulls out a wooden record tablet, its surface crowded with hand-brushed characters, and explains how names were coded. Babies were never listed as courtesan-born on any official paper. Instead, the arranger used neutral phrases like child of the district or infant left under seasonal care. Sometimes the details were so vague that even decades later, scholars have trouble determining which families adopted from the pleasure quarters at all. Historians still argue whether some illustrious merchant lineages unknowingly began with courtesan-born children. The debate isn't likely to resolve anytime soon. As she speaks, a doorway slides open behind her. A young courtesan steps in, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in indigo cloth. You freeze, not from shock, but from the softness of it, the enormity of it. The courtesan's face is steady, but her eyes shimmer with that strange mixture of ache and resolve that people wear when they're doing something impossibly hard yet absolutely necessary. She doesn't look at you. She just walks quietly to the table, bows, and rests the bundle in the arranger's arms. You notice something. The baby never cries. It breathes in small, even puffs, as though it knows instinctively that this moment needs peace. The arranger whispers comforting words, her tone as calming as a lullaby. She explains that many courtesans made these decisions not out of rejection, but protection. The floating world was no place for a child, too unstable, too dependent on appearances, too full of obligations. Adoption gave the child a structured life, a family name, education, opportunities. And strangely enough, many adopted children grew up with better prospects than the biological children of struggling peasants. But then comes a quirky tidbit the arranger shares with a near smile. Some courtesans visited the adopted children later in disguise. Not always as mothers, sometimes as aunties or family friends, or visiting entertainers who just happened to stop by the home with small gifts. The families often recognized the truth but played along, creating a shared, unspoken harmony that let everyone keep their dignity. You imagine a woman showing up with a bag of sweets and a wig slightly askew, insisting, "Oh, I'm just a distant cousin," while the child beams with excitement and the adoptive mother nods politely, as if saying, "Yes, of course you are." Human beings have always excelled at compassion through theater. You follow the arranger into a back room where small wooden cradles line the floor. Not babies, just cradles, each polished from years of use. She tells you these were donated by merchant families, samurai widows, and sometimes former courtesans who had long since retired. Each cradle has a story, a past life, a whisper of hope carved into its grain. One has tiny birds etched into the headboard. Another has faint traces of gold lacquer, long faded. A third has a crack repaired with kintsugi, golden seams turning damage into beauty. The arranger runs her hand along that one. "Some beginnings," she murmurs, "start with repairs." Outside, the night deepens and you drift onward, eventually reaching another kind of adoption house. This one louder, more bustling, filled with older children rather than infants. It functions almost like a training school. You hear the clatter of wooden sandals as boys practice running errands, and the soft chatter of girls learning to fold laundry or prepare tea. Many of these children will grow up to become apprentices in trades: carpentry, fabric dyeing, paper making, shopkeeping. Some will enter the performing arts, becoming dancers, musicians, storytellers. A teacher waves you over. She's cheerful, lively, and slightly frazzled, the universal expression of anyone who spends their life wrangling children. She explains that these houses served as middle ground spaces, not quite orphanages, not quite schools, and definitely not brothels. Children stayed here for months or years while families were found for them. The atmosphere is strangely joyful. The children chase each other between tatami mats, giggling. Their laughter floats across the compound like bright beads rolling across a wooden floor. One child tugs your sleeve and proudly announces that he's going to become a lacquerware artist when he grows up. His grin is missing 2 front teeth. You encourage him, because honestly, that confidence could power a small village. Another child is scribbling on a scrap of paper with an ink brush far too big for her hands. She holds it up for you to see, an energetic swirl of black lines vaguely resembling a horse. She beams. You tell her it's magnificent. It's definitely not a horse, but who are you to squash youthful enthusiasm? Then the teacher mentions something that crystallizes the poignancy of this whole system. Courtesans often sent gifts anonymously, small coins, toys, bits of cloth, to support children they'd never see again. Some gifts arrived annually, always unsigned. The children accepted them as lucky charms. The staff accepted them as reminders that love often continues quietly, invisibly. As you step back outside, you pass a stone walkway lined with wooden plaques. Each plaque marks a child successfully placed with a family. Names aren't written, just blessings. May your path be long. May your meals be warm. May your footsteps be light. You read them slowly, feeling each one settle into your chest. A soft breeze travels through the willow leaves above you, and you think of the courtesan you saw earlier, the strength in her posture, the tremble in her eyes. You picture the child she entrusted to the arranger, now cradled safely in a room warmed by lantern light. And you realize something almost paradoxical. In a world shaped by transactions, contracts, and obligations, the adoption network was powered by something far gentler: steadiness, hope, community, a quiet determination to give the next generation a chance to walk a calmer path. As you walk away, the lanterns flicker behind you, glowing like tiny guardians watching over all those invisible stories, all those quiet beginnings woven into the fabric of Edo's floating world. As your quiet journey continues down the steady waters of the Tiber, the world around you reveals another layer, one that does not belong solely to merchants or farmers or soldiers, but to the rhythms of belief, ritual, and gentle reverence that shaped everyday Roman life. For the Romans, religion was not a separate sphere reserved for temples and priests. It was folded into the soft fabric of daily existence, woven into meals, greetings, travels, and even the smallest decisions. Along the riverbanks, this subtle spiritual choreography becomes especially visible. On the left, you see a small stone altar, barely the height of your waist. It is simple, worn by weather, not grand like the Capitolier or the great temples of the Forum. Yet this modest altar has likely received more prayers than the huge marble monuments of Rome. Boatmen, traders, and travelers often stop by these riverbank shrines to offer a few drops of wine or place a small garland of flowers. These gestures are quiet, humble acknowledgments of the river goddess, Tiberinus, and of the protective spirits believed to dwell in the flowing water. You may imagine a boatman beginning his day here. Before loading crates, before untying ropes, before loosening sails, he might kneel briefly, whispering a request for smooth currents and a safe passage. And at sunset on the return trip, he may pause again to offer thanks, even if the journey was uneventful. Romans believed that blessings were maintained not by elaborate ceremonies, but by small, continuous acts that expressed gratitude and respect. As you drift a little farther, you pass a cluster of houses forming a tiny riverside settlement. Between two of the homes stands an alcove built into a wall, a lararium. It is painted in gentle earth tones and depicts the household gods, the lares. Every Roman family, regardless of wealth, honored these spirits daily. A father or mother might light a small lamp, while a child places a bit of bread or fruit at the base of the shrine. Even sailors who lived on their boats often had miniature lararia carved into the wood or painted on small panels. These shrines were a reminder that every home, whether built on land or floating on the currents, was protected by unseen guardians. Life along the Tiber carried a special blend of public and private rituals. For example, river workers often left offerings not only to Tiberinus, but also to Portunus, the god of harbors and quays. His temple near the Forum Boarium stood close enough that its influence felt present even miles upriver. The people believed he watched over the gateways of the city, including the invisible gates formed by the river's currents. On his festival, the Portunalia, families and workers might throw old keys or small tokens into the water, symbolizing renewal, protection, and the opening of safe paths. As your boat moves southward, you begin to notice something else: the faint sound of music drifting across the water in a thin ribbon of melody. At first, it seems almost like an echo, but soon you recognize the soft notes of a reed flute accompanied by the gentle tapping of wooden sticks. On a wooden platform extending from the riverbank, a small group of people celebrate a local festival. Nothing grand, nothing crowded, simply a gathering of neighbors sharing wine, bread, and song. The Romans held hundreds of such festivals throughout the year. Some honored major deities, while others were more intimate, tied to local traditions, agricultural cycles, or community milestones. One such festival, the Feriae Latinae, was celebrated on the Alban Mount, but influenced gatherings across the region. Another festival, the Parilia, honored shepherds and the protection of flocks. Though it was originally rural, it eventually became a city-wide event. Along the river, people might light small fires as purifications, or jump through gentle plumes of smoke as a symbolic cleansing. These rituals were performed with the belief that harmony between people, land, and spirits ensured the stability of life. As the boat glides deeper into the river's embrace, you observe an older woman washing clothing by the water's edge, pausing occasionally to sprinkle water toward the river while murmuring a short verse. This is not a formal prayer, but a common practice, acknowledging the river's presence as a living force. The Romans personified many elements of nature, believing that woods, springs, hills, and rivers were inhabited by deities known as noumena. This worldview did not demand intense devotion. Instead, it encouraged gentle respect, a soft awareness that one lived in partnership with the natural world. Even those who traveled for work, merchants, messengers, fishermen, carried small charms or pieces of wax stamped with sacred images. These humble talismans served as reminders that fortune could be influenced by thoughtfulness, humility, and proper ritual behavior. Before embarking on a journey, a traveler might touch the charm to their forehead and whisper a blessing for clear skies and smooth waters. These actions were not dramatic. They simply maintained a sense of equilibrium between the human world and the divine. Occasionally, your boat drifts past a Roman villa perched on a gentle hill. Smoke curls from its chimney, and a caretaker walks along a garden path carrying a basket of herbs. Near the villa's entrance is another shrine, larger and better decorated than those in the river villages, but serving the same purpose. Wealthy Romans, too, engaged in these daily rituals of gratitude and protection. They believed that a household thrived when it honored its ancestors and acknowledged the spiritual forces that guarded hearth and home. As you pass by, you imagine the quiet routine inside. A servant placing fresh laurel leaves at the lararium, a family member lighting incense, and perhaps a brief offering of honey cakes made earlier in the morning. These rituals were not burdensome, they were comforting. They provided structure to the day, a rhythm that soothed anxieties and fostered a sense of belonging to family, to land, to history, and to the gods. Your boat continues downstream, and soon you approach a wider stretch of the river. The air feels cooler, the water deeper. Here stands a small wooden dock used by fishermen. They too participate in their own spiritual patterns. Before casting their nets, many touch a small carved fish attached to their belt, a symbol of good fortune and abundance. They whisper a short phrase, not meant to conjure miracles, but simply to recognize the unpredictable nature of their work. A good catch depended on skill, but also on the goodwill of nature, and so they maintained these little rituals to show respect. Farther along, you witness a quiet procession moving along the riverbank. A group of people carries baskets filled with flowers, fresh herbs, and small clay figurines. At the front walks a priestess wearing a simple white cloak. She is leading a seasonal ceremony dedicated to a local river nymph. These sorts of small, local deities were cherished by communities, and their festivals tended to be peaceful and unassuming. Participants gather near a natural spring or shady cove, offering tokens, singing slow hymns, and placing garlands on the water's surface. The river carries the flowers gently downstream, allowing the blessing to travel with the current. As you watch the scene fade behind you, it becomes clear that spirituality in Roman times was not a grand, distant institution. It lived in gestures as small as a whispered blessing, a pinch of grain tossed into the fire, or the soft lighting of an oil lamp at dusk. The Tiber's travelers performed countless such rituals, each contributing to a sense of order and calm in a world filled with uncertainties. Floating onward, you feel these rhythms settle around you like a blanket. The slow ceremonies, the meaningful silences, and the subtle exchanges between humans and the natural world create a tapestry of life that is both ancient and intimately familiar. It is a reminder that tranquility often comes not from grand moments, but from small acts repeated with care. As your boat glides farther down the Tiber, the gentle world around you reveals yet another layer, one not written in marble inscriptions or preserved in scrolls, but in the simple ways people interacted along the river. The Tiber was more than a waterway of commerce and travel. It was a living social corridor. Here, unnoticed by history's grand narratives, everyday Romans built small connections, exchanged soft words, and formed the kinds of relationships that made life feel stable, familiar, and human. You begin to notice that the riverbank is never truly empty. Even in the quieter stretches, there is always someone crossing paths with someone else. An old fisherman greeting a farmer, a pair of craftsmen exchanging news, or children laughing as they toss pebbles into the water. These encounters are brief, often lasting only a moment, but they stitch the community together like threads of an invisible tapestry. On a small patch of sandy shore, two women are rinsing vegetables in the river's cool water. They stand close, their baskets resting between them, talking in soft voices that drift across the surface like ripples. Their gestures are relaxed, familiar, practiced through years of shared routines. One hands the other a bunch of herbs. The other returns a handful of fresh figs. These simple exchanges strengthen friendships that stretch back through generations. For them, the river is both workplace and meeting place, a shared space where daily tasks blend gently with companionship. As your boat floats by, the river widens slightly, and along the bank you see a group of men repairing a fishing net. Their movements are slow and deliberate, their fingers weaving strands together with practiced patience. They talk quietly about the weather, the last market day, and the state of the nets. The conversation is not dramatic or urgent. Yet, in a world without newspapers, radios, or digital messages, these small gatherings served as the heartbeat of local communication. Knowledge spread from person to person in calm, unhurried waves. A new merchant has arrived. A nearby village has harvested early. A neighbor's child has recovered from illness. These men do not rush. There is time enough for their tasks, time enough to pause, to think, to laugh softly at a shared memory. Their work is steady, their relationships steady, a reflection of the river's own patient flow. You drift on, passing a wooden dock where a young couple sits side by side, their feet brushing the water's surface. They are not speaking, but the quiet between them is peaceful, comfortable. They watch the river together, sharing a stillness that expresses more than words could. Moments like these often formed the backdrop of courtship in ancient Rome. Not dramatic declarations, but gentle companionship built over seasons of shared tasks, shared festivals, and shared glances in familiar places. In the distance, you see a group of children running along the bank, chasing each other with small willow branches. Their laughter echoes faintly across the water, then fades into a soft murmur as your boat drifts farther. Children of the riverside grew up with a sense of freedom, playing outdoors, learning to swim early, helping their families with light chores. They formed small groups, small alliances, small rivalries that mirrored the social world of adults. For them, the river was magic, a playground, a storybook, a place of myths and mysteries. Further along, you reach a quiet stretch where a lone shepherd stands with his flock. He leans on his staff, watching the animals graze while his dog circles gently around them. When another traveler approaches, the shepherd raises a hand in greeting. They exchange a few slow words: weather, grazing conditions, the health of the animals. Such encounters were brief but meaningful. They reminded travelers that they were never entirely alone. These soft acknowledgments helped maintain the social bonds that stretched across the countryside, especially in rural areas where distances could sometimes feel vast. On a small elevated patch of land, you see a few elderly men seated on stones, observing the river. They sit in easy silence, occasionally offering a quiet remark. For older Romans, the riverside was a favorite gathering place, where the breeze was kinder, the sounds more soothing, and the pace slower than in the busy centers of town. They reminisced together, shared memories of harvests long past, retold stories about the river's floods or about unusual creatures spotted in the water decades earlier. In this slow rhythm of conversation, time seemed to soften. The river allowed the elderly to remain part of the community's daily life, giving them a comfortable place to watch the world continue in steady, familiar cycles. As your boat continues its unhurried journey, you drift past a small riverside inn. A few travelers sit outside beneath a woven awning, sipping watered wine. Their faces are relaxed, their bodies tired from the road. They share polite conversation with the innkeeper, who listens more than he speaks. Inns along the Tiber played an important social role. Travelers brought stories from faraway places, offering a gentle form of entertainment and a window to the wider world. The innkeeper, in turn, served as a kind of anchor for these temporary connections, someone who heard countless tales yet carried them lightly. Sometimes, two strangers who met at such inns would share a quiet meal, exchange simple stories, then part ways the next morning, never expecting to meet again. These fleeting interactions were part of the social ebb and flow of the river, moments that enriched the journey without demanding anything in return. Continuing onward, you pass a small clearing where a group of young men practice rowing techniques on the shore, using wooden poles to mimic oars. They laugh at each other's mistakes, gently teasing, encouraging. Their camaraderie is warm, relaxed, rooted in shared physical labor. For workers whose livelihoods depended on the river, mutual respect and cooperation were essential. A boat crew that rowed in perfect rhythm could navigate the Tiber with ease. One that fought or complained would struggle. These training sessions strengthened not only muscles, but trust. Trust built gradually, repeatedly, like the layering of silt at the bottom of the river. Near another bend, you glimpse a potter kneeling by the riverside, washing clay from his hands. A cloth bag of tools rests beside him. Another artisan approaches, perhaps a weaver or a carpenter, and they fall into conversation. They speak about materials, market prices, upcoming festivals, simple trade talk that helps them stay connected. These small exchanges also offered comfort, reassurance that others faced similar challenges, similar cycles of busy seasons and lean periods. This soft, interconnected world forms the quiet social backbone of riverside life. Instead of large spectacles or formal gatherings, most social interactions happened in passing, in a shared chore, a greeting exchanged between travelers, a moment of silence between companions, or a short conversation at a dock or market stall. The Tiber served as a natural stage for these unspoken customs. People paused here, rested here, watched here, worked here. They shared the river not only for practical reasons, but because it felt like common ground, a place where social boundaries softened. A poor fisherman could chat with a moderately wealthy farmer. A craftsman might exchange greetings with a traveler from another region. A child could strike up conversation with an elderly neighbor without fear of impropriety. This subtle intermingling reinforced the sense of community that shaped Roman society. The river taught people to move at similar rhythms, to pay attention to the same cycles of nature, to share the same spaces with respect. It encouraged a quiet understanding that life was smoother when people cooperated, acknowledged one another, and maintained gentle social ties. As your boat drifts onward, the sun tilts lower, casting warm light across the water. The river begins to glow with soft gold, and the shapes of people along the banks become silhouettes, simple outlines of a living community settling into evening routines. You feel that you have witnessed not dramatic events, but the subtle, steady pulse of human life. People who, though long gone, live their days with a peaceful rhythm shaped by the river's currents. The river bends gently, and you feel the Tiber guiding you toward a quieter stretch, where the bustle of trade and social encounters fades into a soft, reflective hum. Here, life seems to slow almost imperceptibly, as though the water itself is asking you to notice the subtler, smaller patterns that make everyday existence meaningful. You drift past small homes perched on the banks, each one with its own rituals, its own steady rhythm, and realize that these quiet routines often had as much power over life as the grand laws passed in the forum. You see a woman kneeling outside her house, scrubbing vegetables in a small basin of river water. She pauses every few moments to glance at a little shrine tucked against the wall. A flickering oil lamp casts shadows across the tiny figurines of the lares, the household gods. She murmurs a quiet greeting, offering a few grains of wheat from her basket. Even this small, seemingly ordinary act carries weight, a recognition that her life is shaped not only by her labor, but by forces she cannot see. This was the rhythm of Roman domestic life, an interplay of work, devotion, and observation. Historians still argue whether such daily gestures were more practical or spiritual in nature, but the intent remains clear. A person participating in a cycle larger than themselves, acknowledging both human and divine presence. As you drift farther along the bank, you notice a small cluster of children playing with wooden tops. Their laughter rings softly across the water, mingling with the gentle lapping of the river. A boy spins his top too close to the edge, and a girl quickly nudges it back. You can almost hear their parents calling softly from doorways, reminding them of safety without dampening joy. These moments seem trivial, yet they were essential to teaching social norms, cooperation, and awareness of surroundings. The Tiber, in this sense, served as both playground and classroom, nurturing the next generation with gentle, often imperceptible lessons. Nearby, a group of women gathers for an evening wash. They share the small basin and the space along the riverbank, talking in soft tones about everything and nothing. Market prices, gossip from other districts, the weather, the success of the day's bread. In the midst of their chatter, one quietly mentions an herb she uses to ease discomfort from pregnancy. A humble, practical remedy passed from mother to daughter, from neighbor to neighbor. Fringe practices like this blend with mainstream knowledge seamlessly. Romans relied heavily on herbal remedies for daily life, though historians still debate how effective they truly were. Some scholars argue these practices were as much about reassurance and habit as actual efficacy. You watch the exchange, noting how small gestures and shared knowledge knit the community together. As the river widens, you catch the distant sound of someone playing a lyre. The gentle notes seem to float above the water, reaching you in the softest whispers. Along the bank, a man sits with a notebook of sorts, scratching away with a reed pen. He is a scribe, recording transactions, events, or personal notes. Small acts that often go unnoticed but preserve the continuity of everyday life. You realize that life here is not defined by monumental events alone. Every action, every note, every song carries meaning, however subtle, and contributes to the shared history of the people who live along the river. A fisherman drifts past in his small boat, nets resting beside him. He pauses to dip a hand into the water, lifting it slowly and letting the droplets fall back, creating tiny rings on the surface. Perhaps it is habit, perhaps superstition, perhaps nothing at all. But in that gesture, you glimpse the quiet attentiveness Romans cultivated. Daily life required awareness, patience, and respect for forces beyond human control. From currents to weather, from river spirits to household gods, people moved in harmony with what they could not command. You notice a wooden sign hanging over a small riverside shop, slightly tilted. The shopkeeper is inside, polishing simple clay cups and plates. A young apprentice sweeps the floor quietly, careful not to disturb the serene atmosphere. Patrons trickle in and out, exchanging soft words and leaving coins in an unhurried fashion. The shop's rhythm mirrors the larger river, continuous, measured, and unassuming. In a city dominated by politics and spectacle, these quiet places were essential, serving as anchors in the ebb and flow of daily life. In a narrow alley leading down to the water, a small group of elderly men is seated around a fire pit, quietly roasting chestnuts. They pass a clay cup back and forth, taking slow sips of diluted wine. One of them tells a story, an anecdote from decades ago about a flood, a market mishap, and the strange kindness of a passing stranger. The others listen intently, occasionally nodding or murmuring agreement. You notice the calm cadence of their voices, the gentle rise and fall of storytelling that carries lessons without pressure, humor without mockery, and memories without sentimentality. These oral traditions, repeated countless times in similar forms, are how communities preserved subtle cultural knowledge beyond formal records. You drift past another household where a young woman is practicing the spinning wheel. Her movements are rhythmic, almost meditative. Each thread drawn from raw wool seems to mirror the river itself, stretching, pulling, returning, joining a larger pattern. Her grandmother watches quietly from the doorway, correcting posture gently, praising her when attention is just right. Daily chores were never purely utilitarian. They were embedded with learning, ritual, and aesthetic appreciation. Even the simplest acts became a meditation, a quiet contribution to the social fabric, a way to align human life with the gentle pulse of nature. A little farther, you pass a small riverside temple. Though modest in size, it hums with presence. A lamp flickers inside, a faint incense aroma drifts through the door, and a few worshippers kneel silently, moving their lips in inaudible prayers. They offer thanks for minor blessings, safe travel, steady harvests, health, or even just a peaceful evening. You realize that spirituality, in its most gentle form, was less about spectacle and more about creating a constant awareness of gratitude and continuity. A mainstream historical fact resonates here. Small temples and shrines were ubiquitous in Roman neighborhoods precisely because they integrated divine acknowledgement into the daily flow of life. As twilight settles, you watch families begin to gather their children for the evening meal. Women stir pots of porridge, men wash their hands in a basin of cool river water, and children sit quietly, learning the unspoken manners of riverside life. The community moves together in harmony, not by edict or force, but by shared rhythms and mutual understanding. Even minor deviations, lost items, spilled water, a sudden gust, are met with calm correction rather than dramatic reaction. In this, you sense a deeper lesson. Tranquility is not an absence of activity, but the careful orchestration of small, mindful actions. Finally, as the sun dips below the horizon and the river reflects fading gold and gentle violet hues, you realize that the true story of life along the Tiber is not written in the conquests of emperors or the pomp of public ceremonies. It is inscribed in quiet greetings, in careful chores, in whispered prayers, in shared laughter, and in the small, persistent acts of daily survival and community. This is the river's subtle gift, a reminder that continuity, resilience, and connection often exist in the softest gestures. The world of the Tiber at dusk carries you forward, and you feel your senses adjust to the slow, unhurried pace. The air is cooler, scented faintly with river mud and distant flowering herbs. Lanterns begin to glow, their light flickering across the surface like tiny, drifting stars. And in that gentle illumination, you recognize the human capacity for steadiness, adaptability, and quiet, enduring grace. The river bends gently, and you let the boat drift with the soft current, feeling the Tiber guiding you deeper into a quiet, reflective stretch of the city. Here, away from the crowds and the marketplaces, life unfolds in subtle gestures and whispered routines. You notice small groups of people clustered along the banks, neighbors greeting each other, artisans carefully packing their tools, children playing with simple wooden toys. The rhythm is slow and unhurried, almost meditative, a contrast to the chaos of the forum or the busy streets of the city center. You pass a small household where a young woman sits outside, mending a torn piece of cloth. Her movements are careful, precise, almost ritualistic. Each stitch seems to align her thoughts as much as her fabric. Occasionally, she pauses to glance at a small shrine tucked into the corner of the courtyard. The flickering lamp casts delicate shadows on the tiny figurines of the Lares and Penates. She whispers a few words, offering a quiet thanks for the tools, the food, the roof over her head. Even in the most ordinary actions, the Romans sought a connection to the divine. Historians still debate how much these gestures were genuinely spiritual versus habitual, but the intention to honor daily life remains evident. As you drift further, you notice a group of older men seated on a low wall, their hands folded around clay cups of watered wine. They exchange soft words, telling stories of long-past harvests, unusual river currents, or strange visitors from distant villages. Their voices are calm, measured, each pause deliberate, as though the rhythm of speech itself was a form of meditation. You can almost see the invisible threads of memory connecting them, tales passed down over decades, lessons embedded in quiet anecdotes, humor tucked carefully into every sentence. These oral exchanges were more than entertainment. They were a subtle form of education, passing wisdom to younger listeners and reinforcing community bonds. Nearby, a few women gather around a basin washing vegetables and linens. Their conversation drifts from practical matters, the quality of the harvest, the price of bread, the day's errands, to softer, more personal topics. Advice for their daughters, small remedies for minor ailments, even whispered news about neighbors' children. A fringe detail catches your attention. One woman, in a hushed tone, explains that she has been using a particular herb to ease morning sickness. While mainstream Roman remedies relied heavily on familiar ingredients like rue, mint, or fennel, these subtle, homegrown solutions reveal the resourcefulness of women in managing both practical and delicate aspects of life. You notice that her neighbors listen intently, absorbing the knowledge quietly, passing it along later. You watch as a small group of children chase each other along the riverbank, kicking up dust and laughing softly. One boy missteps, falling briefly into the shallow water, and his sister quickly helps him to his feet. Their parents, seated nearby, smile but make no hurried movement to intervene. Children here learn social rules, resilience, and cooperation by observation and gentle guidance rather than strict enforcement. Their play mirrors the rhythm of the river itself, flowing, sometimes unpredictable, but always returning to calm. On a small dock, a fisherman tends to his nets, carefully untangling a knot. His apprentice stands nearby, hands poised to assist. The fisherman occasionally pauses to look at the water, feeling its subtle currents, whispering a short blessing to Tiberinus for safe passage and bountiful catches. It is a mainstream historical fact that river deities were honored by fishermen to ensure protection and prosperity. Yet some practiced small, personal rituals that bordered on superstition, such as tossing a coin or a tiny fish-shaped charm into the river. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were widespread or merely localized eccentricities, but the care and attention paid to these acts reflect a deep understanding of risk, patience, and harmony with natural forces. Further along, you pass a group of artisans preparing their wares for the evening market. A potter kneads clay, a weaver checks the alignment of threads, and a carpenter smooths the edges of a freshly cut board. Their hands move in quiet synchrony, each motion deliberate and precise. You notice the small gestures of collaboration, a shared word of encouragement, a nod of approval, a brief correction passed along without irritation. In these subtle exchanges, the social fabric of the riverside community is reinforced. Cooperation and attentiveness, rather than competition alone, define the flow of daily life. You approach a small wooden bridge, and beneath it, a family of ducks glides along the water. The sight is so ordinary it almost goes unnoticed, yet it carries its own rhythm. Children point, laugh quietly, and mimic the ducks' soft quacks. Elderly neighbors smile from the nearby benches, recalling how ducks, fish, and other creatures are subtle companions to daily life along the river. Nature and humanity coexist here with unspoken respect. Even the occasional misstep, a child slipping into mud, a duck scattered startled by a passing boat, is met with gentle laughter rather than alarm. Along the bank, a group of women gathers herbs and flowers, preparing simple remedies and household decorations. They talk softly about which herbs are best for calming discomfort, improving sleep, or soothing a mild fever. These small acts of care, transmitted through observation and experience, reflect the ingenuity and attentiveness of everyday Roman households. Fringe practices, like hanging bundles of dried herbs above doorways or leaving small offerings in kitchen corners, blend seamlessly with mainstream techniques. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, but they undoubtedly contributed to the tactile, lived experience of domestic life. As your boat glides past another cluster of homes, you notice a young girl sitting quietly on a doorstep, sketching figures in the dirt with a stick. An older woman, perhaps her grandmother, observes without comment, occasionally nodding or offering a word of advice. This slow, observational learning was typical in Roman communities, knowledge passed down in unhurried increments, reinforced by repetition, attention, and subtle correction. The river itself, steady and patient, seems to mirror this method of teaching. Guidance that is continuous, unobtrusive, and profoundly effective. Near the edge of the Tiber, a small shrine stands quietly, its lamp flickering against the approaching dusk. Families pause for brief prayers, murmuring thanks for safety, health, and small fortunes. Even travelers, merely passing, often offer a small token or a whispered word of gratitude. In these soft rituals, life along the river maintains a sense of balance, a reminder that even fleeting actions contribute to continuity and harmony. The Tiber, like these quiet prayers, carries both the physical and spiritual weight of countless small gestures, connecting past, present, and future in subtle ways. Finally, as twilight deepens and the lanterns along the river flicker to life, you notice the soft cadence of the evening settling over the community. Children return home, artisans tidy their tools, fishermen prepare nets for the night, and the gentle flow of water continues, unbroken and patient. You realize that the beauty of this riverside world is not in grand events or dramatic moments, but in the quiet, repeated acts that sustain life, relationships, and culture. The Tiber is a witness, a guide, and a gentle teacher, reminding everyone who passes along its banks that the ordinary is, in fact, extraordinary when observed with care. The evening deepens along the Tiber, and the gentle current carries you past narrow alleys, quiet docks, and homes where lanterns glow like tiny stars. The water is calm, reflective, mirroring the deepening sky, and you feel the pace of the river echoing the steady rhythm of life around it. Here, away from the markets and busy crossings, the city's quieter routines come into focus. The small patterns of domestic work, subtle social interactions, and soft, almost imperceptible rituals that give everyday existence its structure. On the left bank, a woman leans over a wooden basin, scrubbing freshly laundered clothes. She pauses to shake the cloth gently, letting the water drip back into the river, and murmurs a quiet blessing. It is a gesture of gratitude as much as habit, acknowledging the water that cleanses her work and sustains her household. Nearby, a man is repairing a small fishing net, his fingers deftly untangling the knotted cords while keeping an eye on the gentle swell of the current. These tasks, ordinary though they seem, require attention and patience, qualities the riverside community cultivates naturally, and which the river itself seems to encourage. A little farther along, children chase one another between the reeds lining the bank. They laugh softly, their feet stirring ripples across the water's surface. A boy loses his balance and nearly falls, but a companion reaches out to steady him. Their parents watch from nearby benches, smiling but allowing the children to resolve small accidents themselves. This approach to learning, through observation, gentle correction, and experience, is a hallmark of riverside life. It teaches responsibility, empathy, and collaboration without the need for harsh instruction. You notice a small shrine tucked into a corner near the river. Its flickering lamp casts delicate shadows, illuminating tiny figurines of lares and penates. Families pause briefly to offer a few grains of wheat or a pinch of incense. Historians note that domestic worship was a central part of Roman life, but some of the smaller, individualized rituals, like leaving a small coin in the shrine or whispering a personal wish, have left little trace in formal records. These subtle acts reflect a more personal, intimate spirituality that coexisted with public ceremonies and temple worship. Scholars still debate how widespread such individualized practices were, but their presence in literature and anecdotal evidence suggests they played a meaningful role in daily life. Nearby, a group of artisans is tidying their tools as the day winds down. A potter carefully wipes clay from his hands, while a weaver adjusts threads on her loom, smoothing the fibers with gentle fingers. Their apprentices observe quietly, learning not only the craft, but also the social rhythm of work. Cooperation, respect, and measured patience are just as important as technical skill. Even small gestures, a nod of approval, a shared glance, or a word of encouragement help maintain the subtle balance of the workshop and, by extension, the wider riverside community. A fisherman pushes his boat away from the shore, inspecting his nets before evening casting. He pauses, running a hand along the water and murmuring a quiet prayer to Tiberinus. Mainstream historical sources confirm that fishermen often honored river deities. But fringe practices, such as tossing a coin or a tiny figurine into the water, demonstrate the personal and sometimes idiosyncratic nature of devotion. Historians still argue whether these small superstitions were common or localized quirks, but they illustrate the human desire to harmonize with the forces beyond control, blending practicality with spirituality. Across the river, a young woman sits under a tree, weaving a simple basket. Her grandmother watches from a low stool, correcting posture gently or offering a quiet tip. The teaching is soft, unobtrusive, and patient, a slow passing of knowledge that values observation and repetition over force. Nearby, a child plays with a wooden top, spinning it along the ground while a neighbor watches, smiling at the care and concentration required. These everyday interactions, seemingly trivial, cultivate attentiveness, dexterity, and shared experience, echoing the slow, steady pulse of the river itself. As twilight deepens, you notice a few small boats drifting lazily in the current, their occupants speaking in hushed tones. Travelers pause to offer thanks for a smooth journey or to share a simple story from the road. Inns and riverside shops, now quieting down, serve as anchors for these transient connections, allowing strangers to exchange news, advice, or gentle hospitality before continuing on their paths. These soft, ephemeral networks reinforce community without requiring formal infrastructure, a testament to human adaptability and social intelligence. Along the bank, a group of elderly men and women gather around a small fire pit, roasting chestnuts and sipping diluted wine. They share memories of floods, harvests, and local festivals, passing the stories along to each other with humor, gentle teasing, and reflection. Oral traditions like these preserve cultural knowledge, social norms, and collective memory in subtle ways. The storytelling is measured, slow, and attentive, ensuring that each lesson and anecdote is absorbed without pressure. It is a quiet continuity, reinforcing relationships and sustaining identity in ways that written records alone could not. Further along, you spot a tiny riverside shrine where offerings of herbs and coins have been left by households, travelers, and local workers. The lamp flickers softly, illuminating the figurines with a gentle, calming glow. Families pause briefly, muttering prayers for health, prosperity, or safe passage. These acts are small but meaningful, integrating spiritual awareness seamlessly into daily life. Even in moments of routine or solitude, people maintained a subtle sense of connection to forces larger than themselves, finding reassurance in repeated gestures and quiet reflection. The river itself seems to reflect these rhythms. As night falls, the water darkens, catching the glimmer of lanterns, moonlight, and stars. Its gentle movement mirrors the flow of human activity along its banks, steady, patient, and deliberate. You notice how each action, from the simplest household task to the softest social interaction, contributes to a larger tapestry of continuity, harmony, and quiet resilience. Finally, you drift past a cluster of homes where the evening meal is being prepared. Children wash their hands by the river, women stir pots of porridge, and men carry firewood for the night. Every gesture is deliberate, measured, and harmonious. The community moves together in a rhythm dictated not by command, but by awareness, cooperation, and the gentle guidance of shared routines. As the river carries you onward, you realize that the beauty of life along the Tiber lies not in grand spectacles or dramatic events, but in these quiet, unassuming acts that sustain connection, nurture skill, and foster continuity across generations. In the soft glow of twilight, you feel the steady heartbeat of riverside life, calm, enduring, and profoundly human. It is a reminder that stability, harmony, and subtle joy often reside in ordinary routines, small gestures, and the quiet attentiveness of everyday life. The Tiber flows steadily as you drift into the deeper, quieter stretches of the river, where the light of lanterns begins to mingle with the fading glow of sunset. Here, life moves at a gentler pace, revealing rhythms that might go unnoticed amid the hustle of markets or public festivals. The riverside communities demonstrate a subtle choreography: quiet work, soft conversation, and small rituals that knit together daily existence. You notice the interplay of observation, memory, and gentle instruction shaping the lives of everyone along the banks. A young woman kneels beside a shallow basin of river water, scrubbing clothing with careful, deliberate movements. The water drips slowly back into the Tiber, and she murmurs a quiet blessing. Her gesture is habitual, yet intentional, blending practicality with acknowledgement of the river's presence. Nearby, a man repairs a fishing net, his fingers deftly untangling knots while pausing occasionally to observe the current and whisper a word of thanks to Tiberinus. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that fishermen honored river deities to ensure safe passage and abundant catches. Yet some practiced more idiosyncratic rituals, such as tossing a coin or tiny token into the water. Historians still argue whether these personalized acts were widespread or isolated eccentricities, but their existence demonstrates the nuanced interplay between faith, labor, and survival in Roman riverside life. Further along, children chase one another across the riverbank, kicking up dust and laughing quietly. One boy loses his footing and splashes into the shallow water, only to be steadied by a sister or neighbor. These small lessons about balance, cooperation, and attentiveness are integrated seamlessly into daily play. Observation and gentle guidance replace harsh instruction, fostering resilience and empathy. Children internalize the rhythm of community as naturally as they learn to navigate the currents of the river. On a narrow wooden dock, a few artisans are tidying their tools as twilight settles. A potter wipes his hands clean of clay, while a weaver smooths the fibers on her loom, checking for alignment. Their apprentices observe silently, learning both technique and the subtle social protocols that sustain collaboration. A shared nod, a word of encouragement, a small correction, all reinforce trust and maintain harmony. Life along the Tiber depends on these micro-interactions as much as on individual skill, revealing a quiet social intelligence cultivated over time. Across the water, a small household shrine flickers in the dimming light. Families pause briefly, leaving small offerings of wheat, coins, or incense. This intimate form of domestic worship, practiced alongside public temple ceremonies, demonstrates the interweaving of personal spirituality and everyday routine. Some Romans may have performed these small rituals automatically, but others treated them with conscious care, a soft acknowledgement of forces beyond human control. Scholars still debate the prevalence of these practices, but they clearly shaped the rhythms of domestic life, fostering reflection and gratitude in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. A fisherman adjusts his nets, humming a quiet tune as he works. His apprentice observes, occasionally reaching to assist, their movements synchronized with the slow pulse of the river. Small acts of care, patience, and observation pass between them, reinforcing both practical skills and a shared understanding of river life. Fringe practices, like leaving charms or reciting whispered words for luck, coexist seamlessly with mainstream techniques, highlighting the nuanced blend of superstition, tradition, and experience that characterized Roman labor. Nearby, a young woman under a tree weaves a basket while her grandmother observes silently, offering the occasional tip. The teaching is slow, unobtrusive, and patient, reinforcing the idea that knowledge is transmitted gradually through observation and gentle correction. The river itself seems to model this method, moving in a steady, unhurried current, a natural teacher of timing, care, and subtle persistence. Along a narrow path by the river, a small group of elderly men sits around a fire pit, roasting chestnuts and passing clay cups of diluted wine. They share recollections of past floods, harvests, and minor events, occasionally slipping in quiet humor. These oral traditions are as much about social continuity as storytelling. They reinforce relationships and collective memory, offering both education and comfort. The rhythm of speech, careful and deliberate, allows stories to be absorbed fully, leaving space for reflection and connection without pressure or urgency. Further along, you notice a group of women gathering herbs, carefully sorting, crushing, and arranging them for household remedies or culinary use. Conversations drift softly, covering topics from sleep aids to minor ailments, from cooking advice to neighborhood news. Many remedies are mainstream, rue, mint, or fennel, but others are idiosyncratic, passed along through observation and personal experimentation. Historians still debate how widely these more unusual practices were adopted, yet their presence illustrates the ingenuity and attentiveness inherent in domestic life. As night approaches, the river glimmers under the first moonlight, and the air carries the faint scent of ripening herbs, baked bread, and the river itself. Small boats drift lazily in the current, travelers murmuring words of thanks for safe passage or sharing a short story from the road. Inns and riverside shops, now settling into evening quiet, provide anchors for these transient connections, allowing strangers to exchange guidance, tales, and hospitality before continuing on their paths. Along the bank, a group of children plays quietly, mimicking adult gestures in gentle improvisation. Their small games teach coordination, observation, and cooperation, as well as the rhythms of social interaction. Nearby adults watch without interference, understanding that these lessons are embedded in play, in repetition, and in small, soft corrections. The river itself mirrors this approach, slow, consistent, and patient, carrying lessons without force. In a modest riverside home, a family prepares the evening meal. Children wash hands in the Tiber, women stir pots over gentle fires, and men carry firewood to the hearth. Every gesture is deliberate, measured, and harmonious. Cooperation and mindfulness are emphasized over speed or efficiency, and the community's collective rhythm aligns seamlessly with the slow, enduring pulse of the river. Finally, as lanterns flicker across the water and the night air cools, you recognize the beauty of life along the Tiber. It is not in grand public spectacles, political triumphs, or monumental structures, but in quiet routines, gentle instruction, and attentive observation. Small gestures, repeated consistently, sustain community, nurture skill, and preserve memory across generations. The river, flowing steadily beneath the twilight sky, carries these human rhythms, linking past and present, work and play, labor and reflection in a soft, enduring harmony. The night deepens along the Tiber, and the river carries you past a stretch of quiet banks where lantern light flickers against the rippling water. Here, life unfolds with gentle continuity, revealing patterns often invisible amid the city's bustle. The soft sounds of water lapping, leaves rustling, and distant voices form a lullaby that accompanies the everyday rhythm of riverside life. You notice that even in the smallest gestures, preparing meals, tending nets, or passing a quiet word of advice, there is a profound attentiveness, a kind of mindfulness that binds individuals to each other and to the river itself. On the left bank, a woman tends to a small fire outside her home, stirring a pot of simmering porridge. She pauses to watch the embers glow, inhaling the faint aroma of burning wood mixed with herbs. Nearby, her daughter kneels by a basin of water, carefully washing vegetables while humming softly. The mother occasionally murmurs advice, a tip on rinsing, a correction of posture, or a gentle reminder to save scraps for the compost. This interplay of observation, correction, and subtle instruction is characteristic of Roman domestic life along the Tiber. Skills, customs, and practical knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next, often without the need for formal teaching or dramatized instruction. A short distance away, children chase one another across the riverside path, laughing softly. One trips on a stone, and another reaches out to steady them. Their parents, watching nearby, intervene only minimally, allowing the children to learn balance, cooperation, and resilience through natural consequences. These playful interactions are as much about social training as entertainment. By imitating adult behaviors in gentle, guided play, children internalize lessons about teamwork, attentiveness, and the rhythm of everyday life. On a small wooden dock, a fisherman carefully inspects his nets, untangling them with deliberate, measured motions. He pauses to run his fingers along the river's surface, muttering a quiet word of thanks to Tiberinus for safe passage and bountiful catches. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that fishermen regularly honored river deities, but some performed more individualized rituals, leaving charms, tossing coins, or reciting personal prayers. Historians still debate whether these practices were widespread or isolated, yet they reveal a personal dimension to labor and spirituality, emphasizing respect for forces beyond human control. Nearby, a group of women gathers herbs and flowers for cooking and medicinal purposes. They sort, crush, and bundle the plants while engaging in soft conversation. Some advice is practical, grounded in widely known remedies, such as mint for digestion or chamomile for sleep. Others are more idiosyncratic, local knowledge passed down through observation or personal experimentation. These subtle forms of shared expertise reflect the ingenuity of domestic life, blending careful attention, tradition, and adaptation. You notice a group of elderly men seated around a small fire, sharing diluted wine and roasting chestnuts. They recount stories of past floods, unusual river currents, or memorable harvests. Each tale is told slowly, with deliberate pauses and gentle humor, allowing the listeners to absorb both the content and the rhythm of speech. Oral storytelling is a subtle method of education and social continuity, ensuring that knowledge, values, and communal memory pass across generations without formal records. The calm cadence of their voices, punctuated by quiet laughter, contributes to a sense of security and belonging. Across the river, a young woman weaves a basket under the shade of a tree, her movements rhythmic and meditative. Her grandmother sits nearby, occasionally offering advice or demonstrating a particular technique. Instruction here is unobtrusive and patient, emphasizing learning through observation and repetition. Fringe practices, such as personal prayers for focus or invoking protection over the work, may accompany the weaving, blending spiritual mindfulness with practical skill. Scholars still debate how common these personalized rituals were, but they highlight the subtle interplay between domestic labor, spirituality, and social continuity. Further along, children play near the reeds, tossing small sticks into the river and mimicking adult gestures. Their laughter mingles with the gentle water sounds and occasional call of a bird. Adult observers intervene only when necessary, allowing the children to learn through experience and gentle guidance. These lessons in observation, patience, and coordination reflect the broader riverside life. Skills, relationships, and social norms are taught softly, organically, and often imperceptibly. On a quiet stretch of bank, a small shrine flickers in the dimming twilight. Families pause to leave offerings of wheat, coins, or herbs, murmuring thanks for safety, health, and daily sustenance. These domestic rituals, practiced alongside public temple worship, reflect the integration of spiritual mindfulness into routine life. Even brief personal gestures create a sense of continuity, linking generations and reinforcing both community and individual responsibility. As darkness settles, the lanterns along the riverbanks glow warmly, their reflections stretching across the gently moving water. Small boats drift in the current, carrying travelers who murmur soft words of gratitude or sharing brief tales of distant towns and quiet adventures. Inns and riverside shops, now closed for the night, provide anchors for these transient exchanges, maintaining continuity in a landscape of constant movement. Finally, the river itself mirrors the rhythm of the community, steady, patient, and deliberate. Every task, conversation, and gesture contributes to the overall pattern of life along its banks. Cooperation, attentiveness, and shared responsibility define the flow of daily existence, much like the current of the Tiber, slow, enduring, and quietly powerful. Here, amidst lantern light, drifting boats, and the whisper of water, you recognize the extraordinary beauty of ordinary life. Small gestures, repeated routines, and subtle attentiveness forming the fabric of human connection. As you glide onward, you realize that the Tiber is not merely a river, but a teacher of patience, observation, and harmony. Its gentle flow sustains life, reflects community, and preserves continuity. The banks, alive with quiet domestic activity, storytelling, and subtle rituals, reveal that the extraordinary often exists in the simplest, softest details, the ordinary acts that sustain, nurture, and connect. The night has fully settled over the Tiber now, and you glide along the water, surrounded by the soft glow of lanterns reflecting off gentle ripples. The air is cooler, carrying a faint scent of herbs, earth, and river mud, and the hush of evening settles over the riverside homes. Life here has slowed to a comforting rhythm, soft, deliberate, and almost meditative. You feel the pulse of the river echoing the pulse of the people, their routines intertwined with the currents that guide your quiet journey. Along the bank, a woman tends a small cooking fire, stirring a pot of porridge with a careful, unhurried motion. She occasionally glances at a small shrine tucked into the corner of her courtyard, whispering a word of thanks to the Lars and Penates. The light flickers against her hands as she continues, a perfect harmony of labor and quiet devotion. Nearby, her daughter kneels at a basin of water, washing vegetables and passing them forward one by one in precise, gentle movements. These domestic tasks, simple as they seem, are imbued with intention. In Roman life, domestic labor was rarely separated from mindfulness. Every motion, every gesture had practical, social, and even spiritual significance. Fringe practices, such as sprinkling herbs into the water or murmuring a soft blessing, accompanied these routines, blending tradition, superstition, and subtle ritual. Historians still debate how widespread these idiosyncratic gestures were, but they clearly reveal a careful attention to continuity, care, and domestic harmony. A little farther, children chase one another along the narrow riverside paths, kicking up dust and laughing quietly. One trips near the water's edge, but another reaches out to steady them. Their parents watch with gentle smiles, intervening only when necessary, allowing the children to learn balance, empathy, and cooperation through play. This soft, natural method of instruction reflects a broader pattern. Observation, repetition, and gentle guidance are more effective than hurried correction or forceful discipline. The children learn to navigate both the riverbanks and the social fabric of their community in tandem. On a nearby wooden dock, a fisherman kneels, carefully mending a net while humming a quiet tune. He pauses to run his hand along the water, whispering a soft acknowledgement to Tiberinus, the river god, for protection and abundance. Mainstream records confirm that river deities were widely honored by fishermen and river workers, yet some individuals practiced more personalized rituals, tossing small coins, offering fish-shaped charms, or reciting private prayers. Historians still argue over how prevalent these unique customs were, but they serve as subtle reminders of human ingenuity and the desire to connect labor, risk, and faith into a coherent daily practice. Across the water, a small group of artisans tidies their tools. A potter wipes clay from his hands. A weaver smooths her fibers, and apprentices observe silently, learning the delicate balance of skill and social harmony. A nod, a soft word of encouragement, or a gentle correction sustains trust and smooth collaboration. Life along the Tiber relied as much on attentiveness, patience, and cooperation as it did on individual mastery. These micro-interactions, repeated day after day, weave a resilient social fabric that supports both work and relationships. Nearby, an elderly man tends a small fire with chestnuts roasting over its glow, joined by companions sharing diluted wine. They exchange stories of previous floods, unusual river currents, and past harvests, slipping in humor and reflection between facts. Oral storytelling like this preserves collective memory, social norms, and cultural knowledge in a soft, human-centered way. It is a kind of living archive, passed down gently through attentive listening rather than formal recording, ensuring that continuity and connection endure. A young woman under a tree weaves a basket with rhythmic, meditative motions, her grandmother observing and offering guidance only when needed. Instruction is unobtrusive, emphasizing observation and patience. Sometimes she murmurs a soft word of blessing over her hands or the fibers, an intimate ritual blending practical skill with subtle spirituality. These small, repeated gestures, whether mundane, caring, or spiritual, define the texture of life along the river, showing that the ordinary is suffused with care, attention, and quiet devotion. Children play near the reeds, tossing sticks into the water and mimicking adult tasks. Their laughter mingles with the gentle sound of water lapping against the banks. Adults allow the play to continue mostly unimpeded, stepping in only when safety requires it. Through these gentle interactions, children learn coordination, social norms, and attentiveness. Observation and gentle guidance ensure that lessons are absorbed naturally, mirroring the slow, steady flow of the river itself. Near a small shrine, flickering lamps illuminate tiny offerings of wheat, coins, and herbs. Families pause briefly, murmuring thanks for safety, health, and daily sustenance. These small acts of devotion, performed alongside public temple ceremonies, reinforce spiritual mindfulness and communal continuity. Even brief gestures create a sense of connection across generations, anchoring households to their history and environment. As night deepens, lanterns along the riverbanks glow warmly, reflecting off the water like scattered stars. Small boats drift slowly, carrying travelers who share soft words of thanks or short stories from distant towns. Inns and riverside shops, now quiet, act as anchors for these transient social connections, maintaining continuity within the fluid rhythm of movement along the river. Families settle into evening routines. Children wash hands by the river. Women stir pots over gentle fires. Men carry firewood for warmth. And elders recount stories softly to anyone nearby. Every gesture, every motion is deliberate, gentle, and cooperative, creating a harmonious balance that mirrors the river's steady flow. The community thrives not through spectacle or decree, but through quiet attentiveness, cooperation, and shared understanding. Now, as the lanterns flicker and the river carries your thoughts along its steady current, you notice how softly life moves here. The Tiber hums with calm continuity, small gestures, gentle guidance, and quiet rituals forming the tapestry of everyday existence. Children learn patience and cooperation. Artisans pass knowledge through subtle observation. Households maintain continuity through whispered prayers, attentive labor, and shared tasks. Even the simplest actions, washing vegetables, mending a net, roasting chestnuts, hold meaning, connecting past and present, work and devotion, family and community. The river itself seems to breathe along with the people. Its flow reminds you that stability comes not from force, but from gentle repetition, attentiveness, and a quiet willingness to be present in each moment. Shadows deepen, the moonlight shimmers, and the soft murmur of water becomes a lullaby. Life along the Tiber is a meditation in motion, a world where ordinary acts are extraordinary when observed with care, and where connection is sustained through subtle, persistent attention. Allow your mind to drift with the current. Imagine the glow of lanterns reflected in dark water, children laughing softly in the distance, artisans finishing their work, and families preparing for sleep. Feel the gentle rhythm, the soothing cadence of evening life, and let it wash over you. These are the quiet, enduring patterns that have carried humans along rivers like the Tiber for centuries. Soft, deliberate, and profoundly calming. Now, close your eyes, feel the gentle current beneath you, and let the night carry you to rest. The Tiber and its people have shared their world. It's time for you to sink into sleep, wrapped in the calm, enduring pulse of history itself. Sweet dreams!